Welcome back. For those who are joining us for the first time, Pariyegak, welcome. And those who came back, thank you for coming. It means that maybe you want to give me a second chance, and I'm really grateful. So I would like to thank my dear friend, Mrs. Arpine Bizdikyan, for cooking and providing the meal tonight. It is delicious. It is wonderful. Thank you, Arpine. And I would like to thank Mr. and Mrs. Vehan Arpine for obviously sponsoring the meal tonight. By the way, I also would like to say that the wine selection is excellent. It's very good. So if I speak a little bit longer tonight, you know why. It's the wine selection. Today, we will speak about trauma, grief, and the role of faith in healing. And from a spiritual perspective, we will look at God as the healer of broken hearts. So the objective today is to explore how emotional wounds impact spiritual life. But before we go any further, just focus on the idea of relationships. We as human beings, one of the most important things that defines us is the relationships that we have. Because without those relationships, we are isolated and we run the danger of not knowing who we are. So the relationships are very important. And when we look at the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, we see that the triune God, the way God reveals himself to us, God is very much relational. One of the theological essays that I have read described the relationship between the Holy Trinity as a dance. And that was a very avant-garde way of looking at the Trinity, but in a very interesting way, tried to say that God is relationship. The psychological focus for tonight is trauma and emotional suppression. We will spend some time speaking about this, and just like I said last time, if I make any mistakes, it is the responsibility of Dr. Najarian to correct me. And I will make a lot of mistakes. Okay, so many trauma survivors learn to numb or dissociate from emotional pain as a survival strategy. When we choose not to feel a certain feeling or a certain emotion, that feeling or emotion doesn't just disappear. It is stored somewhere within us, and it will manifest itself in different ways, and these are the common ways that those unwanted or unprocessed feelings or emotions express themselves: depression, anxiety, chronic stress, and reactivity in relationships. I want us to go over this and try to understand what is the difference between repressed and suppressed. These words are a lot of times used interchangeably, but there are nuances. Repressed emotions are unconscious, so you are not aware you're doing it. These emotions are pushed out of conscious awareness because they were too overwhelming or unacceptable, especially during childhood. Repression is an automatic, unconscious defense mechanism, and someone who experienced early trauma may not remember or recognize how it's affecting them. I've seen a lot of people who would say, I don't remember much from my childhood. And you would say, how come you don't remember your childhood? And they're not lying to you. They're telling the truth. And what they're doing is they've gone through repression because whatever they have gone through has been really too overwhelming for them to be able to process. Now, suppressed emotions are conscious. You are aware of the emotions, but you choose to avoid or delay dealing with it. Suppression is deliberate and a voluntary act. Example, feeling angry during a work meeting but choosing to hold it until later. So in short, repression is automatic and unconscious, and suppression intentional and conscious. So here is how repressed and suppressed emotions can show up in relationships. Repressed emotions, example, a person might constantly withdraw or become anxious in close relationships without understanding why. Not sure if you have gone through this or you've seen people go through this. Everything looks perfect, and then something doesn't go right. A person just withdraws themselves. Physically, they might be there, but emotionally, they're not there. They're acting because of some repressed emotions. They may have repressed early attachment wounds. Last time we spoke a lot about attachments, neglect, rejection, We will speak more about those in the coming slides. So they're not consciously aware of the source, but their body and their behaviors react as if they are in dangerous situation. Suppressed emotions in relationships. During conflict, one partner feels hurt or angry but says it's fine and pushes it down to avoid a fight. What's happening? They're consciously choosing not to express their emotions in the moment, maybe due to the fear of conflict, shame, or wanting to keep the peace. We spoke last time about attachment and we spoke about childhood trauma. And today I have a few slides that will go over what are some of the common childhood traumas that we go through. We go through childhood traumas not because our parents were bad people, not because they were inadequate, but we are human beings. And as human beings, there are times that we are reacting emotionally, and those are fine. But whatever we choose to do as parents, they will have a lasting effect on our children. Emotional neglect, what it looks like. Parents are physically present, but emotionally unavailable, dismissive, or unaware of the child's feeling. I work with a client who would say, my childhood was absolutely perfect. And he would report that mom and dad had a shop, and they would both be working in the shop, and he would be on the second floor. They were not there. None of the parents were attending to the needs of the child. So the internalized message was, my feelings don't matter. What happens to that when we become adults? Difficulty recognizing or expressing emotions often feels empty or numb. This is emotional neglect. Verbal abuse or harsh criticism. Verbal abuse, harsh criticism. People who grew up in the Middle East, this was very common. This was a preferred pastime activity. What it looks like. Constant yelling, name-calling, shaming, or comparison. Why can't you be more like your sister? The shaming, the name-calling, probably those of us who came from different countries, we know exactly what I'm talking about. So when we are exposed to that kind of an environment, that type of culture, the message internalized is, I'm not good enough. Adult impact, low self-esteem, perfectionism, inner critic, and fear of failure. Because the message was, I'm not good enough, we need to compensate. 3, conditional love or approval. What does it look like? Love and praise are given only when the child performs, behaves, or achieves. As this is very much like a transactional. I must earn love. This is the internalized message. And adult impact, people-pleasing behavior, performance anxiety, overachievement, and difficulty of setting boundaries. This is very interesting why when love is conditional, people have difficulty setting boundaries, and that goes hand in hand with people's pleasing behavior. Parentification, what does it look like? Child takes adult responsibilities emotionally or particularly, often due to parental illness, addiction, or immaturity. Sometimes the cases that we encounter of the parentified child are horrible. And I'm going to read this, and then I'm going to say one thing that is not here, that just came to my mind. I'm only valued when I help others. Adult impact, burnout, codependency, difficulty asking for help, and suppressed needs. One thing that I forgot to add here is that the parentified child kind of misses their childhood. They don't have childhood. They become adults. They become very mature, but that maturity is not a real sense of maturity. It's a fake sense of maturity because they had to become mature. Physical or sexual abuse, what it looks like. Any act of physical harm or violation of bodily autonomy. Internalized message, I'm unsafe, or my body isn't mine. And the adult impact, PTSD, body dissociation, relationship anxiety, difficulty with trust and boundaries. 6, lack of repair after conflict. We don't consider this to be a trauma, but I find this to be very profound. What does it look like? No apology or validation after hurtful arguments. So it happens, and then, yeah, it just happened. Let's pretend it never happened. The internalized message, my pain doesn't matter. The adult impact, fear of confrontation, avoidance of conflict, difficulty trusting people, and this is the last one on this list today, being a witness to unresolved parental conflict. This is related to the previous one, but there's a nuance here. What does it look like? Chronic exposure to fighting, tension, or emotional volatility between caregivers. Message internalized, love is chaotic, safety isn't guaranteed. Adult impact, hypervigilance, anxiety in relationships, overfunctioning or withdrawing to avoid conflict. One of the things that I, again, forgot to add here, these people don't have a very good blueprint in their own marital relationships or romantic relationships. Why? Because they did not experience something that was meaningful so that they can learn. One of the things that I have learned, and I repeat when I'm doing premarital counseling, is that marriage is a school. And in that school, we learn from our parents, and the good things that we have learned, then we go and implement for the next generations. Each of these wounds can be repressed or suppressed depending on how the child coped, and often they remain unacknowledged until adulthood. These are the traumas that I wanted to cover because we spoke about traumas last time and I did not specify, and I felt that I was not doing a good job. So, do we have any questions about the traumas that we covered?
When you were talking before about suppression versus repression, for the sake of survival, continuity, harmony, suppression a bad thing?
I cannot tell you it's bad or good if I don't know the context.
No, I was trying to understand, is it negative? Is it always negative to suppress?
No, if I'm in a dangerous situation and suppressing will make me avoid that dangerous situation, I don't think that's a bad thing to do. But when it's the only coping mechanism that I have or I've developed, then it would be something that probably should be addressed.
Is there a possibility for the child to see these traumas but do completely the opposite because he knows it's wrong and they would do
The child, I don't think the child,
not repeat it?
when they are adults, sure. But the child in this situation, unfortunately, they don't have the full awareness. They sense that something is not right. But since the survival instinct is more important and children know that they rely on their parents for survival, oftentimes they will just go with the flow and not confront or say anything because they might lose the little care that they're getting from their parents. But we go back to this in our adulthood and we try to repair the damage, hopefully, if we have the awareness, if we have the courage. Otherwise, you can live a life in oblivion and pretend that everything is okay and basically go through unnecessary suffering. Remember, I think the second or the third slide spoke about depression, anxiety, chronic stress, and reactiveness in relationships. All of that are because of this, or most of that are because of this. Sometimes, yes, I know that the brain chemicals don't function okay, and there is the biological components to mental illness. I'm not saying no to that, but there are so many instances where unprocessed stuff from the childhood will create situations where we will treat people, we'll give them medication, we will do a lot of CBT, by the way, cognitive behavior therapy, but not go and see and assess the level of stress or the history of what they have gone through. For that reason, psychodynamic counseling style, I find it to be really helpful because you're not analyzing the person. You're not sitting down and listening to every small detail and analyzing every small detail, but you have a very good idea of what happened and you're offering help so that they can, or we can correct ourselves. Dr. Najarian.
Bessel van der Kolk is an expert on trauma. In his current book, the title is "The Body Keeps the Score," meaning the body absorbs the trauma. You feel it, and anxiety is a body experience, and the body absorbs that trauma and expresses it in different ways. Children, it's another story. In Armenia, after the earthquake, a common game was the earthquake game. What was that? They would build something with the rubble, and then they would knock it down. They would turn the passive of what happened during the earthquake into active. It gave them a sense of mastery.
Yes.
So they would play
Control.
that. South America, in countries, Middle East, in Asia, when they grow up,
In
Laura
war.
asked about violence and the effect on children, they tend to identify with that. At young ages, they're playing with rifles, they're doing this, and they're learning from childhood what's going on around them. So they identify and relate to that, and it's a serious problem for civilization
Sure.
because it continues every place. And it's the reality of
Sure.
to live with.
I've read The Body Keeps the Score. It's a wonderful book. I can't recommend it enough. And yes, when I was growing up in the Middle East, playing war was very common. We all played war because it gave us a sense of identifying. But what you're saying, I never thought about it, that having a sense of control and the mastery, it's really an interesting perspective. Okay, any other questions or comments so far? Okay,
Comment.
yes.
First time, I've always heard marriage as a partnership.
Okay.
First time I heard it as a school.
Uh-huh.
I've been going to school for 55 years. When am I gonna graduate?
Yeah. Okay. Now, let's try to discuss some methods of healing from childhood trauma. Healing from childhood trauma is a deep process that often unfolds over time. It's important to be mindful. It's a multi-layered process, and it unfolds over time because as we grow older, we are maturing, we are looking at things differently, and that really helps if we are people who inquire and we have this introspection and asking the right questions. It's really helpful. Well, while there's no one-size-fits-all path, here are some key approaches to move from surviving to thriving. So acknowledge the trauma. One of the things that we go through as adults is to minimize and dismiss the childhood experiences. Everything was perfect, as if we have this responsibility to defend and protect our parents, that they didn't do anything wrong. And I'm not interested in bashing anyone's parents, but if we've gone through some tough experiences, we have to acknowledge it. I know what the 10 Commandments teaches us to, the 4th commandment, to honor your parents. And that is in every culture. And I subscribe to that. But what I'm going to say next is controversial. What if sometimes the parent is breaking or not fulfilling their end of the bargain? They're not being the good enough parent that they need to be. So it's not only the child's responsibility to honor, but it's also the parent's responsibility to be the good enough parent. Acknowledging the childhood experiences will not diminish what we have. It will not deteriorate the little relationship that we have with them. It will make it maybe more real. And that's important, to make some superficial relationships hopefully to be a little bit more real. And speaking of this topic, I don't encourage anyone to go and start an argument with their parents. That's not what I'm saying at all. Okay, we can talk about that later if you want. Healing begins when you validate your younger self's pain and recognize it as real and impactful. So this is really a twofold process. It is one short sentence, but it's a twofold process. It requires to feel the pain, basically, to feel the sadness, and then recognize it as real and impactful. So when we choose not to feel, again, it doesn't go away. And we spoke about this last time. We need to go back and maybe imagine certain scenarios from our childhood. We need to look maybe at pictures or videos and see that child and be compassionate. And one of the things that I encourage my clients to do is that to feel the sadness that when you were home and your mom was drunk and you were hungry and you didn't have food, How did that little child feel? And you have to go through those feelings. You cannot just say, oh, I was a bad child. That's why they didn't give me food. But you have to go through the feelings. And the second step that I give to them is that now, if you insert your 45-year-old self into this scenario, into the story, what would you tell your mom or your dad? I don't know. I encourage them. No, you have to tell them something. What are you going to tell them? And sometimes it becomes very difficult. And that's where little anger is okay. To say, why would you do that to me? So now you're feeling the pain, you're expressing the anger, maybe you shed some tears, and you move forward. And life goes on. You don't have to dwell in the past. But letting go requires those two steps, the sadness and the anger. So these are some other steps. Therapy is always helpful, and to see someone who has some training in this area, trauma-informed therapy, is very good. Otherwise, if you go to someone and all they're doing is cognitive behavioral therapy, I'm not knocking it down. It is really empirically validated way, but sometimes you need more stuff than cognitive behavioral therapy. Reparenting your inner child. This is really important, to get in touch with that little child. Because if we've gone through any of the situations that we spoke about, sometimes we don't identify with the victim, we identify with the perpetrator. And that's not good. We need to identify with the child who has gone through some tough experiences and show compassion to the inner child. Connecting with the body, this is important. Connecting with the body can happen through exercise, through some grounding, meditation. There's an app that I always recommend. It's called Headspace. And Headspace is really that meditation experience where they're not telling you're good and you're going to fly and you're going to float. It's nothing like that. But it's all being in touch with your body and feeling different parts of your body. And I find that to be really helpful, especially for those who have a hard time. They can't go to sleep at night. When you do that headspace exercise, it's really helpful. Challenging core beliefs. I finished work and I was wearing a bright orange shirt today. And I decided to go home so that I can put my clergy shirt. I was trying to be formal today. So I go home and can't find my key. And all I'm getting is car key and then the church key, which is this set. It's big, and I cannot find my house key, which is another set. And the first thought that comes to my mind, you're such a forgetful person. And that's a core belief that I have. But I put my hand in my back pocket, and there my key is. And I said, I need an apology. I need to give myself an apology. Because that's a core belief that needs to be challenged. And we all have core beliefs that we need to challenge them and align ourselves with the true identity which we spoke about last week. Build safe, supportive relationships. So if in our childhood certain things were not going or didn't go okay, it doesn't mean that we have to continue the same pattern. Sometimes, unfortunately, we gravitate towards people who behave like our caregivers, and that's very normal. But we can have always friends who will help us grow and provide the support that we need. Practice self-compassion and patience. I'm going to say something about being patient. It's not, again, you don't go and see someone, speak to them for 3 sessions and everything is good. And healing is not a linear progression. It's not like, I was here, I need to be there. It's never like that. It's circles. Sometimes you go forward and sometimes you come back. It's like the queue that you find when you go to, I don't know, let's say the airport. You're going to pass through security, right? You go all the way there, and then you turn back. I was here a minute ago, and it took me 10 minutes now to come back here, which is one step away from where I was. But behind me, there are like 20 people. I'm ahead of 20 people. Although it feels very similar to where I was, but I've made progress. The same thing is our emotional healing. It may be slow, but we are making progress. Okay, healing occurs when we move from fight or flight or freeze states into regulation and connection. And another word I could add here is co-regulation, because emotional regulation is done through the self, but sometimes co-regulation is also important. If I'm freaking out, and if my wife tells me, hey, you got this, relax, she's co-regulating me. And if we trust one another, that's not a bad thing. Safe relationships with people and God, this is also important, help stabilize the nervous system and promote emotional integration. So I think this is the last slide before we go to the theology part. Any questions, any comments about this? Yes?
What's the youngest age you recommend for therapy? A 14-year-old or therapy?
When someone sends a 14-year-old child for therapy, most of the time we want to see the parents. And we recommend that parents also work, because whatever situation we're trying to address with the child is not happening in a vacuum. So we need to assess the entire situation so that we can give the right help for everyone. That's a good question. Yes, Vicky.
What is cognitive? Just a little definition of cognitive behavior therapy.
Cognitive behavioral therapy, it works with identifying thoughts and behaviors that are maladaptive and working to change the thoughts and the behaviors. It's not interested very much where those thoughts and behaviors are coming from. It just, okay, this is what I do typically. It's not working. Let's replace those with this. And it's very quick. You can really make a lot of progress in a very short amount of time. But I've also seen that there's relapse, because when the core issues are not identified, people default back to the original ways of thinking and behaving. Okay, the spiritual growth. This is my statement, and then I'm going to read something from the New Testament. Emotional health is important for true spiritual growth to occur. Emotionally, we have to be in a good place so that we can find ourselves to be also growing. When I was in my training, and my training was an inpatient unit, one of the things that to me was very, very shocking, but then I got accustomed to, was that a lot of people who were admitted into the hospital, most of the time, they would present with religious preoccupation. So a lot of times, when we are not in a mentally, emotionally healthy place, we would try to find something in the spirituality and cling into that and take that to extremes, and that will not be a very healthy choice. So that's why when we are emotionally healthy, then we can look at spirituality in a different way. And why did I pick this part? I guess we have to read this and then I can tell you why. This is from the Gospel of John. This is the last chapter in the Gospel of John. Remember that on Holy Thursday, we read the story of Peter, who did what to Jesus? Denied him 3 times. Peter denied Jesus 3 times. And then in this part, Jesus is reinstating Peter. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" This is after the resurrection now. This is one of the miracles that Jesus performs. They catch fish and they eat fish in the morning. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said. "You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The 3rd time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the 3rd time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep. Very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you don't want to go." Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, "Follow me." This is a beautiful story how Jesus restores Peter and he calls him back into the flock of the apostles. And it would have been really great if the story ended here. It doesn't. There's continuation, and this is interesting. Peter turned and saw that the disciple whom Jesus loved was following them. This is who? John was following them. This was the one who had leaned back against Jesus at the supper and said, by the way, this is when we say that John put his head on the heart of Jesus and he listened to his words, but also to listen to his heartbeat. So that's very deep knowledge of John having about Jesus. It's a very beautiful and mystic relationship. When Peter saw him, he asked, Lord, what about him? Jesus answered, if I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? You must follow me. Because of this, the rumor spread among the believers that this disciples would not die. But Jesus did not say that he would not die. He only said, if I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? I love an Armenian translation to this, which goes something like this. Jesus պատասխանեց անոր, եթե ուզեմ որ մինչև իմ հաջորդ գալս անիգա ողջ մնա, քեզի ինչ. All right, I love that expression. Քեզի ինչ. What is that to you? What problem do you have? Okay, so after being restored, Peter is interested about what others are doing. What's going to happen to John? And Jesus said, mind your own business. Why am I reading this? A lot of times when we find God and we engage into spirituality, the first thing that we do is, oh, they're doing something wrong. I need to go and tell them what's the right thing to do. We get involved in other people's life. We want them to think a certain way, read certain things, and we become preoccupied with others. Jesus says, Kezi inch. So what we need to do is to look inside and make sure that the growth is happening within us. Jesus as the wounded healer. One of the things that we need to learn about our faith is that our healer comes to this world and he identifies with our brokenness. And on Good Friday, we spoke about the downward trajectory. He goes all the way down to the end of God-forsakenness to bring back everyone who has gone away from God. So in the book of Isaiah, surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering. So this was predicted about Jesus centuries before Jesus came. And when we read the book of Isaiah, people say rightfully that the prophecy of Isaiah is the New Testament in the Old Testament because the description is so vivid about what's happening to Jesus. He speaks about, he has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted. Isaiah speaks about this. And Jesus in the Gospel of Luke, when he goes to the first time to the temple to preach, he reads this part and he says, this prophecy has been fulfilled today in your presence. In other words, Jesus is saying, yes, I am sent to heal the brokenhearted. The core of our faith happens during the Last Supper, and Jesus breaks the bread, and he gives the broken bread to the disciples, and he said, this is my body. And I've been a priest for over 20 years, 21 years this year. This past Sunday, when I broke the bread in Badarak, emotionally I felt so overwhelmed that he's not giving us the whole bread to say, this is my body, but it's the broken bread. So Jesus identifies with our brokenness. And when we read the New Testament, we see that Jesus was not afraid of emotions. John 11:35 is the shortest verse in the New Testament. Do you know what's the shortest verse in the New Testament? The shortest verse in the New Testament is made up with two words. Jesus wept. Yes, Jesus wept. Jesus cried when he was about to perform the miracle of restoring the life of Lazarus. In Matthew 21:12, we see the anger of Jesus when he goes and he overturns the tables in the temple. And then in Luke 22, he shows the anguish in the Garden of Gethsemane. So emotions were something that Jesus was very comfortable with. how can we grow spiritually? Vulnerability is an important concept. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Where does this come from? Obviously, the Gospel of Matthew. But what's the context of this? Sermon on the Mount, the part of the Beatitudes. Jesus says, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Who can accept this? It's very difficult to accept this because all we do in life is basically running away from pain and suffering and mourning. One of the things that I started thinking about a lot was as a derhar, when I started officiating funerals, when people cried, mourning their loved ones, somebody would come and say, okay, it's enough, stop crying already. And I started thinking, when we go to a wedding, nobody goes and says to this person, it's enough, you're way too happy, you need to sit down now. Now, unless they're drunk, that's a different story. But if someone is just happy and expressing happiness, nobody goes to them and tells them, you're way too happy, take it easy now. But when it comes to sadness, we try to block it. We do so many things to avoid pain and suffering, but yet Jesus says, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Pain and suffering, they have an underrated value in our existence. Because if you want to grow spiritually, we cannot do that when everything is beautiful and rosy in our lives. The times of pain, the times of suffering, when we go through all of that, and we face those challenges with grace, and face those challenges while asking questions and contemplating, then we may find meaning. One of the worst things in life is when you suffer and you cannot find meaning in your suffering. If we are able to find meaning in suffering, then the suffering doesn't go away, but hope becomes part of our experience. And that is spiritual growth. I'm pretty sure that all of you as human beings have gone through pain and suffering. And when you reflect about the pain and the suffering, wisdom will lead you to say that I became stronger because of what I've gone through. Yes, sometimes I'm not repeating the Chinese proverb that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. That's not what I'm saying. Because sometimes there's a variation of that. It can leave you permanently damaged, and that is true. That is true. I'm not trying to find silver linings. But when we go through periods of mourning and suffering, there's a descent. And that descent, which the Greek word is katabasis, when you go down to the lowest of the lowest, there are so many lessons that you learn there. And the journey is upward trajectory after that. You find yourself. And as someone who's gone through that, I know what I'm talking about. Maybe I'm having a hard time expressing it or explaining it. But look at what St. Paul says. St. Paul, in his letter to the Romans, chapter 5, he says the following: therefore, since we have been justified through faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have gained access by faith into this grace in which we now stand. Now pay attention here. And we boast in the hope of the glory of God. Not only, but we also glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance, character. Character, hope. And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. When we speak about hope, we need to make a distinction. I hope the weather will be nice tomorrow. That's a wish. Okay? Sometimes magical thinking is confused with hope. I hope next time I see my dysfunctional parents, they will be changed. That's not hope. That's wishful thinking. Hope is something different. Hope is in the midst of all the darkness, even the worst thing that could happen to us, which could be death, will not conquer us because we believe in someone who has conquered death. We believe in someone who has showed us that he can go all the way to the end of God's forsakenness and then come back and give us life. This is the hope of our faith. Okay. Yes, was a question? Okay.
But then
Aye.
so when you talk about the meaning in suffering, the ultimate meaning is getting to the other side of feeling God's love. Is that the ultimate meaning of suffering?
I'm not saying that suffering is the only way
No, I know you're.
to feel God's love.
But
But I guess I didn't say, and I should say that no one is immune from suffering. Okay, things are going well for us right now, but we have no guarantees that pain and suffering won't be part of our experience tomorrow. We all can go through that. But it's important that in pain and suffering, we don't give up and find meaning and experience the love of God. Not having faith or hoping that if I have faith, everything should be okay for me, that is a counterfeit sense of Christianity. That's the childish belief, and we do this. I have 3 children. I've done this with my children. Pray so that you will not have a nightmare. Pray so that you will do good at school tomorrow. But if that childish faith doesn't grow, we will continue thinking of God as the performer of good wills. And God should only perform the good things. And if we have bad things, it means that God is not with us. But when we have a deeper sense of faith, we come to understand that pain and suffering is part of our experience because we live in a broken world. And the God that we believe in identified with the brokenness and with the pain and suffering of human experience.
The practical signs are very reasonable because you can read the Bible like a novel. You're crazy. In some of the stories, it's a psychological treatise.
Of course.
And some of the stories are gory, they're sexual, and they're violent. It's mind-boggling.
Yes, I got to tell you a story. A friend of ours got a children's Bible to Hofsep when Hofsep was 5 or 6 years old. And Hofsep started reading, and it was the book of Genesis that he was reading. And this was a translation that was done by the Reformed congregation, a very Calvinist perspective injected in every story, and I didn't pay attention. So the kid is reading Abraham's story, and they connected that to Christ and the cross. And basically, the Calvinists believe in the penal substitution, that God was so angry that he had to punish someone, and he ended up punishing Jesus. This is their theology, which we don't agree at all with. So when he read that, he was traumatized, and he started crying, came to me, "Are you going to do that to me? Because God did that to Jesus?" I'm like, no, and I removed that Bible. So yes, you are right. Reading the Bible has to be an informed exercise, something that has to be in line with the Orthodox teaching. It's really important that we follow the Orthodox teaching because there are so many people who are saying so many different things, but that's not what we believe in. So growing Christ-like character, becoming more patient, forgiving, humble, and kind. These are things that I'm struggling with. Maybe you are better, but these are the things that we need to try to implement in life. Responding with grace rather than reactivity. Grace, I love that word. Noticing a shift from self-centeredness to other-centeredness living. Deepening our understanding of Scripture, we spoke about that. I'm really going fast here. More honest prayer life, praying more consistently, not just in crisis. This Sunday, we had a young gentleman. He said, "I came to church when things were not going well, and then I prayed, everything went fine, and then it's been 10 years that I haven't come to church. And I said, this is not Stop and Shop. You don't come here to get things. Okay, I didn't say it. Okay. Okay, increasing alignment between faith and life. Faith is not what happens to us on Sundays. Faith and life, this alignment is really important. Taking responsibility of our actions, humility, basically our lifestyle has to be aligned with what we believe in. Okay, I think this is it. I want to stop here. And one thing about worship. One last word about worship. Not sure if you paid attention to my sermon this Sunday, but I think I looked at things differently. We go from emotional stuff to knowledge and then to practice. And that is not working because emotions change. Your knowledge can be less or more, and having knowledge only doesn't make you a believer, but practicing your faith makes you a Christian. I said I know a lot of things about Islam, but that doesn't make me a Muslim. I love certain things in Zen Buddhist practices, but that doesn't make me a Buddhist. It is really important to practice faith. And as I said in my sermon, that when I was 6, 7 years old and I went to church, I didn't understand the way I understand things now. But practicing, not only helps you grow deep, but also God reveals himself in worship. Remember, he left with us the church. He left with us the Holy Communion. And we encounter God in the Holy Communion. Participate in the life of the church. Jesus did not give us a book and said, go read this and then everything will be okay. He left us with the church.
Perspective in using mindfulness meditation that's been around 30 years in healing, trauma, and all these other issues that you mentioned.
Mindfulness is one of the preferred ways of dealing with trauma. However, when we speak of mindfulness, there's a tendency to lean towards Buddhist practices, which sometimes people go very deep, and they, without knowing what we have in our faith as Christians, they forget our Christian roots and cling into the Buddhist teachings. I respect their teachings, but that shouldn't replace what we have as Christianity, because every religion tells us, do this so that everything will be okay. In our case, in Christianity, Jesus says, I am the way. So it doesn't tell us do this, but he invites us to be on the way, which is him, so to have a relationship with him. But to answer your question, yes, it is one of the almost standardized way of dealing with so many different ideas of being mindful, having awareness. What I like and what I encourage is having the metacognition, the thinking about the thoughts, thinking about the feelings. That's really important, and not letting the thoughts and the feelings guide your life. When you have metacognition, that's really helpful. Anything else?
Quick question.
Yes.
You had a recommended methodology for biblical reading from the Orthodox tradition. Do we go to the prelacy?
Yes, if you go to the prelacy's website, there are websites now, there are apps now that tell you what is the prescribed reading for every day. If you follow that, just read the readings that our church prescribes, we will really be nurtured with the scriptures. Daily worship, for those who read Armenian, daily worship is the app that I use. Another app is Armenian Prelacy of Canada has an app that they have all the readings. Yes, doctor.
I have a question. In your practice, when you're you practice with therapy, if patients come to you and say, "Why has God forsaken me?" because of whatever terrible thing is happening to them, because I understand a lot of patients that
Sure.
terrible things are happening to. How do you respond to that?
I empathize with them. And I say, it feels like God has forsaken you. It feels like you're going through a lot of pain. I don't try to negate that. I don't try to play God's advocate and try to teach them. I meet them where they're at. Because if a person is saying, why God has forsaken me, guess what? To me, that's a prayer. Because that's what Jesus said on the cross. Initially, I wasn't like that. I was like, oh, don't say that. You're sinning. God is here. God. No. If you are in that place, you are in that place. I'm going to come with you to that place. And if there's anything that I can do, I will try to do my best. Thank you, everyone. See you next time.